So I'd like to start out by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Ponick, and I am an Education USA advisor here at the Fulbright Commission. And as you might be able to tell from my accent, I am not originally from the UK. I'm originally from Chicago in the US, where I completed both my undergraduate degree and my master's degree. And I have been living in London now for the past 7 years and working at Fulbright for the past nearly 5 years. And so I'm really excited to be here with you this evening to present this webinar on studying in the US. And so this webinar this evening is going to focus on how to go about choosing a US university, how to fund a US education, and how to apply to university in the US. And at the end, there's going to be some time for questions, which you'll be able to enter into the Q&A box. I'd ask that you hold off on entering any questions into that box just yet, because it might very well be that I answer your question throughout the presentation. So if you do have a question, just kind of make note of it for yourself. And at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to put that in the box. I also wanted to mention that this session is being recorded. And so if you end up having to pop out or you're not able to attend the whole session for any reason, know that we will be sending a link to the recording of this session. And so you will be able to access it, and you'll also have access to all of the slides through the recording as well. So don't feel like you need to jot down everything that you see on the screen. So without further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit more about who we are and the services that we offer. So we are the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and we were established more than 70 years ago in the aftermath of World War II by a man named Senator Fulbright. And Senator Fulbright himself actually studied in the UK as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And he thought that the best way to avoid a third world war would be to encourage cultural and educational exchange. So we were born from that. And we are a non-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by the US and the UK government to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And how exactly do we go about doing that? Well, one of the ways that we do that is we offer scholarships for postgraduate study in the US and postgraduate research in the US and in the UK. And we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying to US universities. The advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim at Education USA is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we are also the only official source of US study in the UK. So you are here because you are interested in US study, and you have come to the right place for that information. And so first, I'd actually just like to start out by talking a little bit about why to study in the US, because thousands of students do choose to go from the UK to the US for their studies each year. And there are a number of reasons that they do this. One of the reasons is just the reputation and the variety of US universities. That they have a very good quality. So there are over 4,500 US universities offering undergraduate degrees, which is compared to about 120 here in the UK. So within that 4,500 universities, there's a huge range of personality and style. Although we do caution to pay as little attention to the rankings as possible, and instead to focus on fit, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a little while. There are so many high quality universities in the US that you've probably just never even heard of. Another reason that students choose to go to the US is the opportunity to experience campus life and activities. US universities are known for having vibrant campus life and encouraging students to be involved outside of the classroom. So there's going to be your typical extracurricular activities such as student government or band or just the newspaper. Sometimes students just like to participate in going to cheer on the American football team at the university. And then there's all sorts of random clubs and extracurriculars to get involved in as well. For instance, when I was at university, I was part of the Harry Potter fan club, and we read the books and we watched the movies, and that was a fun way to kind of meet people and get to know people and be involved in something outside of class. There's also a lot of academic flexibility in the US. we have something called the liberal arts and this focus on teaching. And this is actually one of the top attractions for UK students. The liberal arts curriculum provides a well-rounded education, and it allows you to study from a variety of different subjects. And it means that you have a lot of flexibility to explore your interests before selecting a major. There's an emphasis on teaching and also an engaging classroom environment. So this is really good for students who, for instance, when choosing their A levels, were like, well, how am I supposed to narrow myself down to just 3 or 4 A levels? I have all these different things that I'm interested in. And so going to the US kind of offers that flexibility. That's also good for students who do already know what they want to study, but might also still be interested in taking other classes outside of that. I know of a student who was really passionate about computer science and knew that he wanted to go to the US for a computer science degree, but also loved philosophy. And he was able to go to the US and take those philosophy classes alongside his computer science degree. And he really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to do that. And this might be surprising to some of you, but the funding opportunities are actually another top reason that students choose to go to the US. And we'll discuss this in a lot more detail later on, but there are tons of opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US as compared to the loan-based program that's here in the UK. Going to the US also offers you the opportunity to internationalize your CV, and studying abroad is really appealing to employers. It shows that you've got a boldness to do something different, that you've developed interpersonal skills, cross-cultural communication. It gives you the opportunity to build networks of friends and professional contacts around the world. And you also have the opportunity to have student job opportunities when you're in the US to help kind of build up your experience and build up your CV. So you can work up to 20 hours per week during term time and up to 40 hours per week during holidays and up to a year after graduation in the US. So you can gain that international work experience to help strengthen your CV. And lastly, going to the US gives the opportunity to learn about a new culture. And this, again, is another top reason. Students love to learn about the US culture. The US spans 6 different time zones, has a great diversity in geography and different cultures within the 50 states. There are long summer holidays where many students choose to explore. Living on campus helps students get to know the US culture. And so that's another top reason that students choose to go to the US. I also want to touch on some key differences between a US and a UK degree. So you might already know that a US degree tends to be longer, 4 years for a bachelor's degree versus 3, typical 3 in the UK. You apply to the university as a whole in the US rather than a particular academic department. Again, this reflects that kind of liberal arts philosophy because you might not be choosing your major, your concentration until later in your degree as compared to a very course-specific degree here in the UK. In the US, there's less government control over universities, which means that there's more institutional diversity and freedom. It also means there's no set fees or centralized admissions process like UCAS. The application process does tend to be slightly longer and more in depth because the admissions process is more holistic and much more than just grades, which we'll talk about more later. And in the US, you also apply for funding alongside your application for admission. So it's something that you do at the very same time. And we'll talk about this in greater detail as well. And I also just wanted to note here a couple of exceptions. So law and medicine are actually not studied at the undergraduate level in the US. They are only studied at the postgraduate level in the US. And I also wanted to touch on some terminology because you may have already started to hear me use some of these terms and wondered what they meant. So high school in the US refers to grades 9 through 12. In the UK, that would be secondary school, which is years 10 through 13 in England and Wales, or 11 to 14 in Northern Ireland. And I believe it's S3, 4, 5, 6, S3 through 6 in Scotland, I believe. And where in the UK you refer to university, in the US we say college, university, school, institution, all interchangeably. I confused many people when I first came to the UK, asking them where they went to school. They're like, why do you want to know where I went to school? When really I was interested in where they went to university. So all those terms, college, university, school, institution, they're used interchangeably in the US. Also, instead of a module, we will refer to a class or a course. And then what you call a course here in the UK, we will call a degree program or a major. So this is probably some useful terminology as you research programs and schools in the US. And I also kind of quickly want to run through a timeline of what we recommend in terms of applying to US universities. So we do recommend beginning to research universities 1 to 1.5 years before enrollment. So that would typically be at the end of year 12. And you'd also want to register for any required admissions exams and aim to take those in kind of the summer after year 12 or in the autumn of year 13. So that would be about a year before you plan to enroll. And then you'll want to finalize the selection of where you'll be applying in the early autumn of year 13, or about 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And we'll go over some strategies of how to do this. And then about 8 to 10 months before you plan to enroll, just typically the autumn of year 13, you'll be putting together an application and submitting according to the different deadlines. And then in the spring, before you plan to enroll, typically spring of year 13, which is about 4 to 7 months before enrollment, you can expect to hear back from the universities that you apply to with their admissions decisions. And then based off of where you were accepted, you will notify universities of your decision, usually by the beginning of May before you enroll. And then you'll apply for your visa 1 to 3 months before enrollment. And then we have lots of information on our website to help with pre-departure to the US, including travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, all of that when you get to that stage. And then typically around mid-August to early September is when the academic year will begin in the US. So it's slightly earlier than it is here in the UK. All right, so now that we've gotten some of that basic information out of the way, I want to talk about choosing a university. And this is a really important step in the process of applying to the US. It's important to really think through this step. And the key is going to be flexible. As I said, there's over 4,500 universities offering an undergraduate education in the US, which means it's a daunting process to narrow that down. But we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement in this process. So some important things to note in the context of the US as you consider applying to US study and choosing which institutions you'd like to apply to. There's no national set standard for universities. So universities are free to choose their own set of fees, their own course structure, their own student environments. That means that there is a lot of variety amongst institutions, which is what we touched on as one of the appeals to going to the US. And while it might seem daunting, it's actually a great thing to know that with so many universities on offer and so many different types, there's bound to be a university that's going to be a good fit for you. And we are going to talk about funding in more detail later, but I also just want to mention it here just to make sure that you know that if funding is important to you, then this is something that needs to be considered from step 1 of the choosing process, because you'll want to make sure that you're only applying to universities that offer financial aid to international students. And we'll talk more about this, but please note that this is a really important step of researching universities. And then the other thing that I want to note is that you can and probably should complete UCAS applications alongside your US university applications. You might even choose some universities in the UK that might include a year abroad in the US. And just be mindful of those UCAS deadlines alongside the US university application deadlines as well. All right, fit. So the first step in the choosing process is figuring out what factors are important to you. And we focus a lot on the term fit here at Education USA and the Fulbright Commission. And this means finding the school and the program that's going to be the best fit for you and your personal and your academic interests. And there are a lot of different factors that you can consider with this, both in and out of the classroom. So some of the things you might consider are the types of programs and departments that an institution offers, the location, the availability of funding, as I mentioned, the campus size. Do you want to be an institution with thousands and thousands of students, or would you prefer to be somewhere smaller? You'll want to have a think about the academic environment. Do you want to be somewhere rigorous and competitive, or somewhere inclusive and supportive, or inclusive, supportive, and competitive? So start thinking about these types of factors, what's important to you, and then you can prioritize those. So just for some examples, if you are somebody who doesn't like the cold and snow, you maybe won't be looking at institutions on the East Coast. If you're looking to try and save some money, you might be thinking of living somewhere more rural than living somewhere more urban, as urban environments tend to be more expensive. And again, I'll encourage you here to think beyond rankings, beyond institutions that you've heard of because they're just ones that are famous, right? Rankings in the US are not the same as in the UK. Some of the rankings don't rate the quality of teaching or the graduate prospects. Some give weight to how much money a university has, and others even invite universities to peer rank themselves. And so you should definitely be taking any rankings with a grain of salt. They can be useful tools and maybe helping to identify some universities that maybe you've never heard of that are actually very well known in the US, but they shouldn't be the only method that you use to choose a university. And you'll want to make sure within the choosing process that you're only applying to universities that you've researched and that you could actually see yourself attending for up to 4 years if you're offered a place there. So now that you are going to be thinking about what factors are important to you, and the next step is going to use that information to begin researching universities. And unlike UCAS, you're not limited to 5 universities. In theory, you could apply to as many as you'd like. However, for time and financial reasons, we typically recommend applying to 6 to 10 universities. And so to jumpstart your process of choosing, you'll probably want to focus on narrowing down those 4,500 plus institutions to a list of about 10 to 20 schools that you think could be a good fit for you. So how do you do that? In the choosing section of our undergraduate guide on our website, we have a list of links to different search engines that can help with this process of narrowing down your choices of universities. So we'll go through an example of one just to show what the process might look like. So you'll see on here that this is one of the search engines linked on our website that's called the Big Future College Search. And there's a variety of different filters that you can use, including type, location, major. This is where you apply all those factors that you were thinking through. And so without any filters, there are over 3,600 universities that are listed. So here's an example of putting in some filters. So here I put in some filters to narrow down our list of schools to wanting to attend a small and medium-sized school in Ohio that will meet 100% of financial need. And that brought the 3,600 down to 4 universities, which is a much more manageable number to start working with. So as you can see, you can quickly start to take all that large variety and start narrowing it down to a more manageable number to work with. You can then go into each university profile to find information like the application deadlines and a link to their website. So this is the page for Denison University in Ohio, and you can see that there's other details like the size of the institution, the graduation rate, the average financial aid package. And you can also click on options on the left to get more info on campus life, majors on offer, the process of applying, paying, and all of that as well. Excuse me, just have a tickle in my throat. So once you narrow down your options, you can research them further within the university website itself. And you can even reach out to them directly to get more information. And your goal is going to ultimately to be selecting 6 to 10 institutions where you're actually going to submit an application. And within that 6 to 10, we typically recommend that you apply to maybe 2 what we call reach schools, where you'd be thrilled to attend, but it would be a challenge for you to get into. And just to note here that if you are applying to some of those ultra competitive universities, think Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, these are reach schools for everyone, no matter what your academic profile is. They are going to be competitive for anybody applying to it. So if you're applying to institutions like that, we typically recommend, maybe a couple of those. We also recommend 3 to 4 what we call match schools, which is where your profile is roughly on par with their average admitted applicant. And then you'll also want to maybe have about 2 likely admittance schools. So think of this as being similar to your UCAS insurance choice. So this is a university where your application is going to be very competitive. You'll want to have some of those options as well. So when you're on the university websites, you can typically find the profile of the average admitted applicant, or you could reach out to them and kind of ask what types of grades and scores their average admitted applicant tends to receive if you can't find it on the website. On the website, you'll also find more information about the programs. They've got all sorts of campus virtual tours, especially now, information about student life, sports, student housing, financial aid. You'll also want to see what resources they have for international students. And that can really give you a lot more information. You'll also want to make sure that you're checking out the university's social media channels, which can really help you get a feel for the college and the university personality and what they're focused on. You can also talk with teachers, professors, professionals in the field that you want to pursue for their advice on universities that may be a good fit for you. The best place is going to get the most up-to-date information is going to be the university website. And as I said, don't hesitate to reach out to a university for more information. They do want to hear from you. You can call, you can email them. You will want to make sure that it's the student, the student that's reaching out and not one of your parents. It's a student that's going to be making an application to the university. And so you'll want to be the one that's establishing that connection and getting that information from the university. So now I just want to touch on just a few different universities that are very well known in the US that maybe you've never heard of before, just so that you can get a feel for the different variety and the different things that are on offer in the US. So if you're looking for competitive schools, which are small, collaborative, and offer a lot of research opportunities, you might want to consider a liberal arts college like Middlebury College that's shown here. Middlebury College is located in Middlebury, Vermont, which is known to be a liberal and artsy area of the US, known for its beautiful waterfalls and hiking opportunities. If you are a female student, female identifying student who loves palm trees and sunshine, you might consider Scripps College, a women's college in Claremont, California. And this is Vanderbilt University. This could be a good fit if you want to experience some Southern hospitality, some warm weather, some country music at a private research university that's located in Nashville, Tennessee. So as I said, those are just a few different ones, just so that you can start to get a feel of the different variety that's on offer. I'd also like to touch here about a note on the Ivy League. So the Ivy League is historically a sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. And that is why it's the Ivy League. It's a sports league. So it's not the Russell Group. You cannot join the Ivy League. There are a number of outstanding institutions in the US that, are not in the Ivy League and will never be in the Ivy League because they were not in this original sports league back when it first started. So if you think, MIT or Stanford are probably very big name ones that you've heard of, they are not in the Ivy League. All the universities in the Ivy League are private research universities. And so if you're only looking at those institutions, you'd be limiting your opportunities to explore other institutions such as liberal arts colleges, women's colleges, or specialist institutions. And liberal arts colleges are also extremely competitive. They offer undergrad research opportunities, but they will never be the Ivy League, or they'll probably never be as well known in the UK, despite being top quality schools where you can get an amazing education. And though earlier I did say to advise you to take rankings with a grain of salt, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're thinking about the top 1% of over 4,000 institutions, that means you're talking about over 40 institutions. I'm thinking that you might not even be able to name 40 institutions in the US off the top of your head. So that means that you probably can't even name, a number of universities that are in the top 1% of universities in the US. So that just goes to show how many incredible universities there are on offer and how you want to make sure that you're not limiting yourself to just one set of universities. It's also important to keep in mind how competitive these institutions are. Harvard's acceptance rate in the most recent admission cycle was less than 5%, compared to Oxford, which was about 18%, and Cambridge, which was about 21%. So just something to keep in mind. So now that we've talked more about the choosing process, I'd like to talk more about funding your studies. And as you might imagine, this is one of the top things that we get asked about. So in this section, I want to be really upfront about the costs that are involved to study in the US, but also to dispel some myths related to funding US studies. And something to note before we get started is that finding funding for university is a challenge for not just international students, but for US students too. And so to help you meet this challenge, we're gonna run through the different costs that you can anticipate, different sources of funding that you can pull from, and some strategies that you can implement to find funding. So in terms of some of the costs that you can expect, even within the application process itself, before you even get to the US, there are going to be costs. If a university requires an admissions exam, such as an ACT or an SAT, those typically cost between $100 and $200 US each. Each university application is going to incur a fee of about $50 to $100, although many universities will offer fee waivers for students who qualify for those. There's also, if you are admitted to the US, there's going to be fees for your visa, your embassy appointment, and also for SEVIS, which is essentially the international student database that the Department of Homeland Security uses. There are also going to be tuition and fees, which are costs that I'm sure you do anticipate. Those costs can vary significantly since each university can set their own tuition and fees. Fees are mandatory. They usually cover things like the student union, school athletics, maybe membership to the university gym. But one of the things to be aware of here is that not to be put off by the sticker price, because on a university website, it does usually include the cost of attendance, which isn't only tuition and fees, it's also room and board. It'll often include personal expenses, sometimes trips home, which is compared to the UK, often they'll just show the tuition and fees and they're not taking into account all of those other costs of attendance. The other thing to keep in mind is that while the cost of attendance may include room and board and some of the expenses, there might still be some other living costs like eating out, clothing, entertainment, etc. And as you might imagine, the cost of living can vary widely depending on where your university is located. The cost of rent, if you live off campus, whether you need a car. So those are all things to kind of keep in mind. We do have some good news. There are a variety of funding opportunities available, and it is possible to have an affordable US university education, and many students are able to fully fund their studies without loans. The key is being willing to put in the time and effort to seek out and apply for funding. So it is work, but it can be a very rewarding process if you put in that work. So where does all this money come from? So we'll go into each of these sources in more detail, but typically there are four main sources of funding for study in the US. So the first is just personal and family funds. US universities do expect families to prioritize students' education and invest in that education. The second source of funding is US universities itself, typically through need-based aid and merit-based scholarships. And it's going to really vary how much need a university can meet. So if financial aid is important to you, you'll want to make sure that you're looking for and applying only to universities that offer financial aid for international students. Another source of funding will be external funding bodies. And lastly, as a last resort loans. So we advise this be your last resort. This is because you cannot take your UK student loans to the US, and US-based loans are going to require you to have a US citizen or a permanent resident to co-sign that loan. You can take UK third-party loans out, but we really caution you to be careful around these because they tend to have really high interest rates and payback terms that might even require you to start paying back the loan before you've finished your degree. Just to note, though, that if you do have US citizenship, you can take out a loan and apply to federal loans through FAFSA. So that's something to look into if you do have US citizenship or dual US citizenship. And it might be that you have to pull from a variety of these different sources in order to fund your education. So now to go into a little bit more detail about the funding from universities. This type of funding is ideal because it doesn't usually have to be paid back. There's two main types of funding. Funding that's likely to be awarded on the basis of financial need based on your family's annual income, or merit-based for things like academic merit, based on maybe your A-level marks or your admission test scores, or some type of niche criteria. A lot of universities might offer a combination of need-based aid and merit-based scholarships. Sports scholarships are another example of kind of merit-based scholarships if you are outstanding in a particular sport. As you investigate funding, you'll want to watch for information about whether the university makes scholarships available to international students. Not all do. Some might only have merit-based scholarships for international students. Some might offer need-based and merit-based scholarships. Some might not offer either to international students. So it's just something to keep in mind. And again, if this is something that's important to you, can be included in your choosing process and help you kind of narrow down where it is that you're going to apply. So just to go into a little bit more detail, need-based aid is based on financial need. So universities are going to look at your family's income and calculate an expected family contribution, and then compare that to the total cost of attendance, and then they'll try to meet that gap. And it's going to vary how much of that gap they can meet. Some are going to meet 100% of that gap, some only 80%, some 20%. So you'll really want to look for this information while doing research if you need funding to get to the US. So just to kind of give you an example of what that means, let's say that the cost of attendance at a US university is $50,000 US dollars per year. And they look at your family's income and they determine that your family can afford to pay $10,000 US dollars per year. Then they would say, okay, you need $40,000 US dollars per year to meet that gap. We can meet 100% of that gap, all 40,000, or maybe we can only meet 50% of that gap, so 20,000. So if they're only meeting 50% of that gap, then that means you've got the 10,000 that you can afford to pay, the 20,000 that the university is giving you, and then you still have this other $20,000 left every year that needs to be paid. So you can see why, if funding is important to you, it's probably going to be important to be applying to universities that can meet 100% of your family's financial needs. And as I mentioned, for top athletes, sports scholarships might be available through the athletic recruitment process, and we have more information about that on our website. For more information on university funding, check the university websites. They're going to be a really great resource for you. Be really proactive to find information you need. And oftentimes the process for applying for aid is quite straightforward, kind of filling out forms, and it's integrated into the admissions application. So as an example, this is the Rice University financial aid page, and you can see that it gives you a breakdown of not just tuition, but also room and board, and includes fees such as books and personal expenses, such as flights home. And Rice even has a net price calculator to help you find out how much need-based aid you might be able to receive. So that's something that you can go on and fill out online to kind of get a sense of what your family could maybe expect to pay each year if you were to attend Rice University. You can also find information about merit scholarships and the types of recipients. You'll see here that the process of applying for merit scholarships is actually integrated into the admissions process. There's also a page with funding information specifically for international students. And you'll see that international students are considered for need-based aid and that 100% of demonstrated need is met with grant aid. And they use something called the CSS profile to gather information about a student's financial background to determine their financial aid package. And as I've said all the way along, and I will repeat, it's really important to check each university website and whether funding is available for international students. Because as you might imagine, it really breaks our hearts when somebody reaches out to us and shares that they've gotten into their dream US university, but they didn't realize that they didn't offer funding for international students, or that they needed to apply for that funding at the point of application. And it's really difficult to do anything about it at that point. And we do get these queries all the time, unfortunately. And so I'm really glad that all of you are here now learning about this process so that you know that from the very beginning, this is something to incorporate into the process. So now to talk a little bit more about external funding bodies. So they may include a wide range of professional, charitable, or government organizations that are external to the university. They can be thought of as niche scholarships, as they have specific criteria based on the mission of the funding body. So it could be something from a particular country of origin, particular ethnicity or religious faith, maybe an interest in a particular field or gender, interests, talents. For instance, there might be a funding body that funds scholarships for women engineers. And if you're unique in any way, there's likely to be a funding body with a scholarship out there for you. You just have to find it. One example of a very well-known scholarship is called the Moorhead-Kane Scholarship. And this is a scholarship for students who demonstrate traits of leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. And it provides a 4-year, fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So that's an example of one type of scholarship that's available from an external funding body. There are thousands of funding bodies, so searching does require time and dedication to sift through scholarship listings and to submit separate applications to each body. And so it's for this reason that we do encourage students to first apply for university funding opportunities and then for external funding. And we do have a link on our website to different scholarship search engines that you can use. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about a funding strategy. So here are some different approaches to a funding strategy. So one approach is to explore universities and places with a lower cost of living. So just like in the UK, living in London is going to be more expensive than living in Lancaster. Living in New York and California is going to be more expensive than living in states like Ohio or Georgia. American universities are going to list the full estimated cost of attendance on their website, which will include that cost of living. So you can take a look and see which universities have those lower costs of living available. You can also take a look at programs that have lower tuition, so that just the tuition just costs less. And as discussed, there are also funding opportunities available. So it might be that you are using a variety of these different strategies to help fund your studies in the US. Another option that I want to mention that you might not be familiar with is community college. This is increasingly a popular choice in the US as an alternative pathway that can help save a lot of money. And community colleges generally award something that's called an associate's degree, which is not a degree that's offered here in the UK. It's a degree that has a professional vocational focus. And it also has programs that allow students to do what's called a 2+2 transfer pathway. So what that means is that you start your studies for 2 years at a community college, earning that associate's degree, and then you transfer to a 4-year university where you continue for another 2 years and receive that bachelor's degree. A lot of community colleges have transfer agreements. So you can see here on the screen that Los Angeles Valley College is a 2-year community college that has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, and Cal Poly. In my own personal experience, my husband actually attended a community college. He's from the US as well, so he was able to live at home and had no cost of living while he was at community college. And he was able to work alongside his studies and pay for his tuition because it was such a low cost of tuition. He just paid and didn't have to take any loans. He did that for 2 years, and then he was able to transfer to a 4-year institution where he completed his bachelor's degree. And he was able to come out of university with significantly fewer student loans than a lot of my friends and a lot of other people that I knew, because he had saved so much money by doing those 2 years of community college first. Community colleges are much less expensive than 4-year universities, and you can save thousands by paying that significantly lower tuition of a community college for 2 of the 4 years, like my husband did. There are also smaller class sizes that can be especially valuable for those introductory classes, and you also often have more contact with your professors. They also generally involve a less rigorous application process and entry requirements than a 4-year university. So students with BTECs or OCR or other similar qualifications may apply to community colleges. And very few of them would require any kind of admissions exam scores for admission. So just some final funding tips before we move on. Since applying for funding is simultaneous to the admissions process, you'll want to begin your search for funding early. It's going to take some time to research funding at the schools where you want to apply to, and it'll be take time to apply for any external scholarships if you decide to apply for those. Remember to check out specific university websites and also our online scholarship searches, and we have a list on our website of those. You'll want to consider having a funding strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, to fully fund your studies, you may need a combination of many of the different types of funding that we've discussed, whether that be family funds, university funds, external funding bodies, and loans as a last resort. So you'll want to investigate each type of funding. And it's going to be really important to remain flexible in choosing universities. You're going to want to make sure that you're not just applying where thousands of other British students are going to apply. You'll want to make sure you're not applying to institutions where you're not going to be competitive. Because if you're applying for funding alongside that application for admission, the funding is going to be even more competitive. All right, so now that we've talked about choosing and about funding, I'd like to talk in more detail about completing an application to a US university. So what are US universities looking for? So first and foremost, they are looking for your academic achievement, which is going to be measured by your results. So your GCSE and A levels, or your hires and national fives. And they're going to also be looking at admissions test scores if those are required. And you can check university websites for their average applicant profile to see how you might compare to other students who have been admitted to their university. However, academic achievement alone is not going to guarantee entrance to a competitive US university. The process is much more holistic than in the UK, and it can also be quite competitive at some of those ultra competitive universities. So some other things that they're going to be looking for are academic fit, which might include the reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution and how it helps towards your goals. So as an example of that, there might be an essay that they ask you to complete to say, why is it that you want to apply to our university? Why our university? And if you are, let's say, applying to NYU in New York, and your whole essay is about, I love New York, I love the opportunities New York can offer, New York, New York, New York, then somebody at NYU might say, okay, well, there's other universities in New York, Columbia's in New York, you know, why NYU? And they might not see that fit. So you'll want to make sure that you're doing your research on what it is about that university that really appeals to you. Is there a particular program? Is there a particular campus activity? Does the university have a specific mission that you're really passionate about? And making sure that you incorporate that into your application. Universities will also look at your extracurriculars. There is a focus on this in the US. It doesn't mean that you have to be involved in everything to be admitted into a US university, but it does mean that you'll want to highlight what it is that you're involved in outside of the classroom. And this is a way for them to get to know you a little bit better, get to know more of your personal attributes. Because as I said, it is a holistic admissions process. US universities are looking to diversify their campuses and classrooms. They don't want all the same types of students. They want a variety of different students who are going to learn and grow with each other and from each other. And so throughout your application, they're going to want to know who you are. If you already know what it is that you want to study, they might want to know why you're interested in that. And they're going to try to get a sense of who you are, maybe what your character is, if you have any leadership abilities. All of that is going to be things that they're looking for in your application. So to quickly go through some of these application components, and then we'll go through a number of these in more detail. Unlike the UK, you will apply to each university individually rather than through a centralized body like UCAS. And students can apply to as many universities as they want, though, as I mentioned earlier, for time and cost purposes, we usually recommend applying to 6 to 10 schools. And while each university will have its own application requirements, there is something called the Common Application, and around 900 universities do use the Common Application. And this is a system to kind of help streamline some of that kind of demographic information. It's not UCAS, and that you'll still have to tailor all of your applications to each university. And there might be some different questions asked, but there are some things that you'll be able to kind of enter in once that will be submitted to a number of different universities. There is no standard process for applications or deadlines or requirements. It will vary by university, and each university is going to set their own deadlines and application requirements. So you'll want to make sure that you're kind of staying on top of those and keeping track of what those are. Most applications will, however, follow a similar format, and so you will often be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each. Most applications are going to include an application form with your basic demographic information. Some universities will require admissions test scores, which will be sent to the university by the organization that administered the test. They'll require a transcript of your marks from any GCSEs or A-levels or National Fives or Hires or Advanced Hires. There'll be some essays. They'll ask for 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And then, as we've mentioned, there's going to be an application fee of $50 to $100 per application, though some students may be eligible for a fee waiver at certain universities. So I'll talk in a little bit more detail now about admissions tests. The very first thing that I want to say about this is that you are going to want to make sure before you take an admissions test that it's actually even going to be required at the universities where you're planning to apply, especially during COVID times. A lot of universities have made this optional or have said that they're not even going to look at exams scores at all. And so it's really important to check that. And some universities have said, you know what, we got rid of looking at exams and we didn't miss it. So we've just decided that we are not going to look at admission exam scores anymore. And they've just gotten rid of it altogether. That being said, there are still some universities that are requiring it. And so you'll just want to double check, because if there is an institution that you're passionate about applying to and they require it, then you will need it. So to talk a little bit about what they are exactly, the role that they play in the US is because there's no national curriculum at the secondary school level in the US, the admissions exams are a way to evaluate applicants from diverse areas and schools. So they've created these standardized tests, admissions tests for this purpose. And typically we recommend sitting them in the summer, about a year before you go to the US. So that summer after year 12, or in the autumn of year 13, before the half-term holiday. And universities will typically require either the ACT or the SAT. And so in terms of how to choose between the ACT or the SAT, it's not like one's not considered better than the other. Universities, if they do require the exam, don't care which one you take, they will take either. So it really just comes down to what your preference is. And we do tend to find that students tend to do, like a lot of students, just because of their learning preferences and their learning styles, tend to do better on one than the other. So if you are going to take the exam, what I would recommend and what our advice is for you to find some free practice tests online and actually just sit one of each. Sit the ACT, sit the SAT with that free practice test under timed conditions, and see which one you do better on. And revise for that one, study for that one. you are going to want to make sure that you study for that exam if you choose to take it. All right, transcripts. So transcripts are a listing of your academic qualifications and your marks that are covering your last 4 years of high school. So in England and Wales, that's years 10 through 13. In Northern Ireland, years 11 through 14. In Scotland, S3 through S6. And the transcript is a document that it's actually going to be created by your school. But it might be that if your school doesn't typically have students applying to US universities, that you might need to provide them with some information about what to include in the transcript. We do have templates on our website that you can show them to if you are trying to help your school with this process. But typically the transcript is going to include the years that you attended the school, your GCSE scores, or your National 5 scores, and then any kind of predicted grades. So your predicted A levels, and how maybe a summary of how they got those predicted A levels is, why are they predicting you to get that grade, so that a US university can understand kind of where that information is coming from. Now, there's no direct conversion between UK and US marks. So you're just going to report your marks in the British system. You're not going to try to convert them to the US system. You'll just report them as British marks. And a lot of universities are just going to have schools submit the transcript online through the Common Application or through their application system. But if for some reason the university does require a physical copy to be submitted, then your school is going to have a school official sign it. They're going to place it in an envelope, sign across the seal, and mail it off to the US to ensure that it's official. Universities may also require a school report, which is basically just a document that provides some information about the school itself to provide context to the admissions officer that's reading your application. So information on like where the school is located, the student population, the types of courses or like types of classes that are available to students at your school, that kind of information. And as I said, we've got templates for the transcripts and for the school report available on our website. So please don't hesitate to point your school in that direction if they need that help. You'll also likely be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation for your application. And these are going to be used as a marketing tool for you as an applicant. And though referees will have particular areas that they can speak to, you might direct them, give them a little nudge to write about your ability to succeed at university, your past academic performance, observations about your performance in class or on assignments, any school awards you may have won, any information about your writing and critical thinking skills, your subject knowledge, maybe your work experience, your ability to positively contribute to the university or the campus life where you're hoping to go. Any leadership abilities or your character, your involvement in the school and the community. And you'll want to make sure that you're asking someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom, to write these recommendation letters. The university will likely provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. For example, they'll probably ask for 1 letter from a counselor and at least 1 letter from a teacher. And it'll generally be your responsibility to choose and liaise with referees. Now, I know the position of a counselor isn't necessarily something that exists in the UK in the same way that it does in the US. So typically students in the UK might choose like a head of 6th form or a head of year, or maybe a head of careers to be their counselor referee. And then they will choose teachers from their academic subjects to be their teacher referee. You should definitely consider meeting with your referee to discuss your letter. It's definitely in your interest so that you can help them write the best letter that they can. You'll probably want to schedule a meeting and discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree in the US, your interest in the particular universities you selected, what your future goals are. You might want to make sure that you familiarize them with your academic achievements and your extracurricular involvements if maybe they aren't as familiar with it. You'll also want to make sure that they're aware of any deadlines and any paperwork they need to complete. It's going to be your responsibility to inform them of those deadlines and kind of check in with them to make sure that they complete it. And then of course, thank them when they do complete it. You'll also want to encourage your referees to avoid being too restrained or too modest. is you might imagine American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone. They use very positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom and to talk about the applicant personally. So you'll want to keep in mind what's going to be written about your American counterparts when preparing your UK referees to write their letters. So do encourage them to refrain from using restrained or modest language and to adopt that American enthusiastic tone. And I'd also like to talk about essays, because this really is one of the most important parts of the application process for undergraduate study in the US. Strong essays can really set you apart from other applicants, and they really give you an opportunity to showcase yourself to a university. And to be clear, this is not like your UCAS personal statement. Rather than submitting an explanation of your interests and achievements in a particular field of study, as you would via UCAS, you'll be asked to respond to between 1 and 3 essay questions on the US university application. And each university will set its own questions as well as desired length for your response. However, on the Common App system, there will be one essay question that does go to all universities, and then there'll be supplemental questions which are unique to each institution. So if you're applying to any universities through the Common App, you will have that kind of one common essay that goes to any universities you're applying to through the Common App. And some examples of the prompts that you might have if you're applying through the Common App. So I'll just give 1 or 2. So one example is to reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Another example is to describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? It's unlikely that you're going to be able to compose one essay that's going to sufficiently answer all the questions that are posed by multiple universities. That being said, many students are able to reuse elements of essays for different universities. So just some tips for writing your essays. So first, ensure that you address the question fully. Use clear, concise language and avoid vague or empty statements or cliches. If you do reuse an essay, be really careful to submit the correct essay to the correct institution and double check that all references within the text are to the correct university. You don't want to be saying, I can't wait to attend ABC University if actually you're applying to XYZ University. So make sure that those names match where you are applying. Make sure you proofread extensively and that you ask others to proofread your essays and offer their feedback. But most importantly, be yourself. Don't give the admissions officers the answers that you think that they want to hear. Just give them the truth. Think about what sets you apart and let your personality come through in the essay. And there are more tips on our website and links to example essays on university websites as well. So I really recommend checking out those resources and those example essays if you want more information about that. So now we've talked about choosing a US university, funding those studies, and the application process. I also want to talk about some other opportunities in the US. It might be that you decide that a full undergraduate degree in the US is not for you. And if that is the case, there are some other options. One option could be to go to the US while studying at a UK university through a university exchange program. Many UK universities have established exchange programs with US universities or US-based study abroad programs. So for example, the University of Manchester has partnerships with 18 universities in the US. And this can be logistically simpler for you as the university that you're attending in the UK will help you arrange it all. Another option would be to attend a summer institute. The study of the US Institutes for Student Leaders are short-term academic programs whose purpose is to provide groups of undergraduate student leaders with a deeper understanding of the US while simultaneously enhancing their leadership skills. Or if you really love America, you can spend your degree studying it. Many UK universities offer American Studies programs, which often incorporate a year in the US as well. There's also other opportunities through internships or summer work through BUNAC or through Camp America are some ways to go to the US to do some work. Or you might decide to pursue the US for postgraduate study. And if that's the case, you can come back to us at that point. We've got webinars for you. We've got advice on our website for you. We also do offer Fulbright awards to help fund postgraduate study in the US. I'd like to talk a little bit more now about the different ways that we can help you through this process. First, I want to talk about the Sutton Trust US program, which is a program that we offer at Fulbright in partnership with the social mobility program in the UK called the Sutton Trust. So this program is for very high achieving students who are in year 12 or the equivalents, and who are from low income backgrounds. And what the program does is it helps students explore US universities by visiting the US, travel restrictions permitting. And then if they want to apply to the US universities in their final year of school, then the program supports students to apply to US universities. And the program is free for students who are accepted. And so it really is a wonderful program. So if you think it is something that you might be eligible for and that you might be interested in, you should check that out on our website. The applications for the program will typically open around November time and close in January time. And so definitely check that out if you think it is relevant and interesting to you. You can also visit our website for advice and guides and events. So under this Going to the USA section, we have an undergraduate guide with details on choosing, funding, and applying. So going, believe it or not, even into more detail than I have gone into this evening. So if you haven't checked that out already, definitely recommend that you do. We also have an advising line. So Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 1:30 to 4:30, we are available by phone. We also Monday through Friday answer emails at advising@fulbright.org.uk. So you can reach out to us if you have questions as you go along in the process. We also have a new feature that allows you to book a one-to-one video appointment with an advisor. These are proving to be quite popular, and so they do book up, unfortunately. So if this is something that you are interested in, appointments typically become available about 7 to 10 days in advance. And pardon me, excuse me. For the rest of the month, we are planning at the moment anyways, to have appointments available either on a Wednesday morning or a Wednesday afternoon. So if that's something you're interested in, you can sign up via our website. We also have events throughout the year about studying in the US online and in person when we can. If you signed up for our mailing lists, when you signed up for this webinar, you will be notified about those events. If you didn't sign up for our mailing list and you want to sign up, go ahead and email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk and ask to sign up, and we can get you added to that. And if you haven't already signed up, I want to do a huge plug here for our virtual USA College Day Fair at the end of the month. And I will also, in a moment, I'm going to attempt anyways, to put a link in the chat to register for this. If I can't get the link in the chat, then I will definitely send it in the follow-up email that I send to you all tomorrow. But on the 25th of September, we have a free USA College Day Fair. There are going to be over 150 US universities in attendance. And so you will have the opportunity to meet with representatives from these US universities. Oftentimes these representatives might be the person who is reading applications from the UK. So you might have a chance to actually connect up with the person who could be reading your application, ask them some good questions, make an impression. And these universities are here because they want UK students on their campus. And so this can be a really good tool for helping you narrow down the universities where you want to apply. So if you haven't signed up for that already, definitely sign up to attend that. We'll also have a variety of different webinars available throughout the event to learn a lot more information about various topics. And with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation part of the session. And I would love to open it up to some questions from you. So if any of you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box, and I will go ahead and answer those. I'll give you a moment to do that. And I will also look for that link to sign up for College Day while you post those questions. So I put the link to our virtual USA College Day Fair in the chat for you. All right, questions? All right, so one question is, can we see which organizations will be attending the university fair? That's a great question. And yes, so we are in the process of updating the website at the moment. And so it's not 100% up to date just yet. So you'll want to keep checking back. But if you go to our website, we do have a search feature on the website that allows you to see which institutions will be attending the fair. Another question. Please, could you explain if the admissions team can see which institutions the applicant has applied for via the Common App? That's a good question. And I am actually not certain, I'm afraid. But I would think, no, I'm not certain. If you do want to know the answer to that question, go ahead and email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk. And I can look into that and check with my colleagues and can get back to you with that. One question about the admissions exams. How do you study for ACTs? What do you revise? That's also a good question. So both the ACT and the SAT are broken down into different sections that are related to, so for the ACT, for example, they've got reading, writing, math, and like a science reasoning section, I think it's called. And so, like I said, I would recommend first taking a kind of mock exam under test conditions. And then you can see there might be an area that you already do particularly well in. Maybe you have a strength in a certain subject, and maybe you don't have to revise as much for that subject, but you can see that there's another area that you struggled with a little bit more and you'll need to revise for that. And really, there's a lot of free resources available online. There are also books that you can buy, and you can use those books to help you revise. You could technically also pay somebody to tutor you privately. There are organizations in the UK that do that, but if that's kind of financially not viable for you, there are lots of free ways or low-cost ways to revise. A question here, are there interviews for US universities? And so that's a good question. So yes and no, not in the same way that interviews exist for UK universities. So typically, if a US university offers an interview for an undergraduate degree, it's not typically a required component of the application. It's typically an optional component. And you can they'll either ask you, would you like an interview? And you say yes, and they just kind of offer it to anybody who applies. Or some universities, you can request an interview. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, the interview will be with an alum of the university, so somebody who has attended the university itself. And it doesn't necessarily kind of impact directly into the admissions decision. It's kind of just like an added component. And so really what it'll be an opportunity for you is to kind of share why it is that you're interested in going to the university, why you're excited. And if it is with an alum, you'll also be able to have that opportunity to ask them about their experience and have a conversation with them. So as you can see, it is quite different from what an interview might be like for a UK university. So what stands out as the most to colleges in the Common App essay? What is the main thing they're looking for? Another good, you've all got great questions tonight. So that's a good question. So I would say that from what I've heard from speaking to numerous representatives, what they like to see in the essay is they want to learn something about you that isn't anywhere else in your application. So they've read through your application, they've seen your extracurriculars, they've read your letters of recommendation. But in that essay, they've got an opportunity to learn something new about you that they haven't seen anywhere else. And every US university admissions officer is going to read applications differently, but I have spoken to a number that like to save that essay for last, to kind of look at that last. And so use that as an opportunity to kind of share something about yourself, help them get to know something about you that maybe they wouldn't have known from anywhere else in your application. As a US citizen resident in Europe, do I apply as an international student or a national student? So that's a good question. And so you will be, as a US citizen, you will be eligible for federal student loans and federal funding through that. But if you are attending a European school in a European school system, then they will be looking at you in that sense as an international student in terms of that curriculum. And you can always reach out to the universities itself if you have any specific questions about that. How do we find out about scholarships from outside the university and college? So they're on our website on the external funding bodies page. We have different search functions that are available there. So check that out on our websites. A couple of questions about letters of recommendation. Is there a specific template for letters of recommendation? Are there any, this other one isn't actually a letters of recommendation question, it's asking for recommendations. So is there a specific template for the letters of recommendation? Not really. They don't need to be very long, typically like 1 to 2 pages max. And what's most useful is for the referees to use specific examples. And you can help provide these examples. You can say like, oh, remember that time in this class where this student was struggling and I offered to tutor them outside of class and really helps them, bring their grades up. Or, remember how I'm so passionate about this subject that I went and attended these lectures in my free time and then, wrote this essay based on that. So you can help provide specific examples, but yeah, what's really useful to have in those letters of recommendation is kind of, specific examples where the admissions officer can really picture, all those wonderful qualities that they might be talking about in your letter to kind of, give those examples. All right. Are there any recommendations on specific A-level subjects to do, or do US universities only look at grades in A-levels? Also, are there any co-curricular activities that you would recommend? So just in terms of extracurricular activities, a US university will never say like, we want you to do these curricular activities in order to be at our university. They will always say that they want you to do things that you're interested in. And that you shouldn't be doing something just to kind of check it off a box or to put it on an application, but you should be pursuing your passions and pursuing your interests. And that's what they want to see on the application. And then you also asked the second part of that question, recommendations on specific A-level subjects to do. So a lot of universities, it depends on the university that you're applying to. If you are applying to some of the more competitive US universities, they are going to want to see typically at least 3 A-levels, and they'll want to see them in what they call core subjects. So those tend to be like the maths, the sciences, the Englishes, the foreign languages, the social sciences. Those subjects tend to be those core subjects that they want to see students at least having a strong background in. Okay, so if some universities won't be using the admissions exams, what elements of the application process will be considered competitive? So that's a good question. In that case, they're going to be looking at your marks. So your GCSEs, your A-levels, your National Fives, your higher. And to be honest, even if they weren't, even if they are considering the admissions exam, the most important part of the application is going to be your grades in your GCSEs, in your National Fives, in your A-levels, and those predicted A-levels, and those predicted hires and advanced hires. That really is how they look at the academics first and foremost. And the admissions exam is just another component. But if you have a really high admissions exam score and really low grades aren't going to usually make up for the high admissions exam score won't make up for the low grades, if you understand me. Yeah. How are dual citizens regarded in terms of scholarship, American or British? So if you have US citizenship, then in terms of funding, you can apply for funding that is available to domestic students. You'll be eligible for federal loans and federal funding. So you'll just, and in terms of when you are applying to US universities, there are certain US universities that are what's called need blind. So that means that if they don't take whether you need financial aid into consideration when you're applying to the university, and there's only 5 institutions that are need blind for international students, but there are a greater number of universities that are need blind for domestic students. And so if you have that US citizenship, then you would be able to apply need blind to those institutions that are need blind for domestic students. Is it possible to pay for our tuition fees by working part-time? And then another question related to financial aid: can scholarships be combined with financial aid? So I will answer both of those questions. And so the scholarships can be combined with financial aid. So that is part of the funding strategy, can be to have some financial aid from the university and also external funding scholarships help fund it. In terms of paying for your tuition fees by working part-time, typically if you can only work up to 20 hours per week during term time, and typically that money is going to go towards things like maybe your clothing, maybe going out to eat with your friends, entertainment, that kind of thing. And that kind of money, in terms of getting your visa to go to the US, working part-time can't really be taken into consideration in terms of the funds that are available to you to go to a US university. Just seeing if I can, we've got lots of great questions here. I'm just seeing if we can combine any of them together. So one person said, what did you say the app was called? And another person says, what is the difference between coalition and common application? And so I spoke mostly about the common application in this webinar. And if I'm honest, I actually don't have as much knowledge about coalition. I am familiar with it as an application that it exists, but I don't have as much personal knowledge about it. So if you do want some more information about that, please do write in to advising@fulbright.org.uk, and I will check in with my colleagues and I will do some more research for you, and I can get back to you with more information on that. Will the A-level subjects we take affect acceptance to US universities? So I would say that the answer to that is that it depends. And so as I said, a lot of more competitive universities are going to want to see A-levels in those core subjects of the sciences, maths, English, language arts, social sciences, foreign language, those types of subjects. And so if you have lots of A-level subjects, multiple A-level subjects that are outside of those core, they might just have a question about whether you have had a rigorous enough curriculum to be successful at the rigorous US university. And so, but in terms of taking classes within the core subjects, you know, you can choose whatever classes you want within your core subjects. and that doesn't matter. And if you have any specific questions, you can always reach out to a US university and say, you know, these are the A levels that I'm taking. Would your university consider these competitive A levels? You know, will I be a competitive applicant at your university? If we had the opportunity to visit potential universities in the US, what is the timing to go see campus visits? So one thing to be aware of is that the US is currently not allowing people to enter from the UK if they've been in the UK in the last 14 days, I believe, unless you are a US citizen. And so unless you're a US citizen, you might not be able to enter the US. But if you do want to visit universities in person, then in the US, students typically tend to do that in their penultimate year of study. So like the equivalent of year 12 in the UK, and they might do some in the autumn of year 13. There might be some who are eager and do it kind of even earlier, year 11, but that is typically when it happens in the US. All right, still have a number of questions, so I'll try to speed through some of these. Where do you take the SATs and ACTs? So if you go to our website, you can have links to the pages of where these are offered. And these are usually offered at testing sites throughout the UK. And so you would want to find the one that is closest to your home and take it towards the, take it there. You do want to register for those exams in advance. The ACT has gone computer-based, and so that does mean that they're kind of able to offer it more frequently and in more testing locations, which means, you know, it can be easier to take that exam, which is good. But exam dates do tend to fill up, and so it's something just to keep in mind. Question, do you have to pay back financial aid? So if you are receiving aid from the US university, it is typically in the form of grants, need-based aid, and so typically it does not need to be paid back. There are a small number of institutions that might have institutional loans as part of their financial aid package, and if that were the case, then that would need to be paid back. But from what I understand, those institutional loans tend to be in kind of smaller amounts of not more than kind of $5,000 US per year. And you can always take a look at the university website to see if they include loans in their financial aid packages. As a guide, does a 9 equal an A+? For your search engine, we kind of need to know what our GPA would be. And also another similar question, how do US universities weigh different aspects of UK students' academic achievements? Are predicted A levels the same importance as GCSE results? So yeah, it is hard. We don't actually provide like an exact approximation to what British marks equate to in the US. And the reason for that is because each US university kind of has their own system for that. And so there are some tools that are available for free online that you can use in order to, you know, if you're just trying to get a sense of, are my marks competitive at a US institution? You can use some of those kind of free online tools to kind of do approximate conversion to a US GPA. You can also reach out to a US university and say, you know, these are my grades. I'm trying to, because it's different from a US GPA, I'm trying to understand if I would be a competitive applicant at your university, and see what they say. In terms of whether predicted A levels are the same importance as GCSE results. So A levels are really important because it's your final kind of 2 years of study. If you are somewhere in the UK that's still taking AS exams, those are great, but to have those marks, because they can see that you've got those final marks that will go towards your A level. So that's good, but I know a lot of you are in England where you don't have those AS exams anymore. I would say your GCSEs are going to be important. It's hard to say which is going to be, I mean, I think ultimately they want to see top grades at the A levels is what they want to see. But if you're applying to some of these highly competitive institutions, then your GCSEs are going to need to be good too. So, you know, you're kind of going to want to have a strong application all the way across. Are there any additional complexities of applying to Hawaii or Alaska? I don't think so. No, it's still considered part of the US. I mean, there might be additional costs to flying there. So you might want to take that into consideration. I know Hawaii has a much higher cost of living, so that's another thing to take into consideration in terms of what your overall cost of attendance would be, but it's still considered part of the US. Will the event on 25th of September be recorded too? So I believe that a lot of the webinar sessions will be, but I think you do need to register for the event in advance in order to have access to those sessions. So make sure that you register. And then in terms of the fair aspect, we won't be recording like the individual booths of people coming to speak to the reps. It would just be those webinar sessions that are recorded. I am aware that we are coming up on the end, and so if any of you are needing to drop off as we finish up, please feel free to do that, and know that the recording will be getting sent out. And thank you for joining us. But I will try to get through quickly a few more of these questions. If you receive an offer, will the universities care about the grades you receive in the A-levels? Are offers conditional like in the UK? Good question. And so the answer is it's not conditional in the same way that it is in the UK. That being said, US universities will want to see that you are performing at broadly a similar level to what you were predicted. So if you were predicted 3 A stars and you got 3 A's, great. If you were predicted, 3 A's and you got AAB, also okay. If you were predicted a number of A's and you have a number of C's, that might be a red flag to a university, and they might kind of reach out and say, hey, what's going on? What happened here? In a very severe situation, if you really underperform to what your predictions were, they could even rescind an offer of admission in some of the more severe cases. Are there restrictions to what jobs you can have when first going to the US? So my understanding is, and then another question about employment regarding post-studies employment offers. Is there any advance? Oh no, that's about postgraduate. So restrictions to what jobs you can have when first going to the US. So it typically has to be a job on campus. That doesn't necessarily mean, it will depend on the university. So you'll want to check in with the person who's in charge of that at your university, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a university job. It can oftentimes be like another organization that, like a restaurant or something that's on campus. But typically the restrictions that in terms of the employment are that it's going to be on campus. When you graduate from university, if you use the OPT for the year, you've got more flexibility with that. And there are opportunities to use some of that OPT throughout your studies, but then that would decrease the amount of time you would have to use it after you graduate. What's the process of financial aid like in the second year? So this is going to depend from university to university. And so you'll want to check in with universities themselves. Oftentimes packages will be for the 4 years of university, but some universities will have a process of reapplying every year. Some universities will apply it towards all 4 years, and this will vary from university to university. What is the pastoral care like for students who will be far from home? That's a really important question. And a lot of US universities really take pride in offering care for their international students. They want international students on their campus. They want them to be successful. They want them to enjoy their experience. And so a lot of universities are going to have some type of international student service office on their campus and resources available for students. A lot of US universities also have a lot of mental health resources available just to all students. And I would definitely encourage you researching this as part of your research process and seeing what's available at the universities where you apply, because it is a really important question. What extracurricular activities do UK students typically have? And that is really going to vary. And so it really just depends. it depends on where in the UK a student lives, what types of extracurriculars are available. Depending, if you're somewhere more rural, you might not have as many opportunities available. And also extracurricular activities can be all sorts of things. A US university might consider like taking care of younger siblings while a parent works. If that's something that you do regularly and it takes up a lot of your time, they might consider that an extracurricular activity. And so there's all sorts of answers to that question. All right, a few more, and then we'll wrap it up. Regarding post-studies employment offers in US and the UK, is there any advantage to do undergraduate and postgraduate studies together in the US against doing only postgraduate studies in the US? I think, again, this comes up, this is personal preference. And so I think that just comes down to you and what you're most interested in. How likely is it to be able to take a year of study abroad, specifically in Australia, if you're intending on receiving a full ride? Will there be much financial assistance if you're already receiving the funding for a scholarship? Great question. And this is something that you'll want to incorporate into your research, because many institutions that do offer extensive financial aid will offer this financial aid for students to do a year abroad. And so if you are looking at the types of institutions that offer that type of aid, then you will want to, you'll want to ask these questions to that institution and see if that's something that is covered, but it is definitely possible. All right, final question. Do you see a lot of US universities becoming test optional permanently in the next couple of years? That's a great question. And as I said earlier, there are a lot of institutions that are choosing to do that. Like I said, they have said, we didn't have the admissions exam scores this year. We didn't miss it. We're getting rid of it. We don't want it. There are institutions that are already deciding that they want it back. There are other institutions that say, okay, we're not going to do it this year, but we know we want it next year. So watch the space and we shall see. All right, thank you all. Those were incredible questions. Really excited to see you asking those types of questions. I hope that you come to our virtual USA College Day Fair at the end of the month, and that you continue to ask some of these great questions to our representatives at the fair. As I said, this session has been recorded, and so I will be sending you the link in an email tomorrow to the session so that you can access it. And I hope that you have a lovely evening. And if it is as warm where you are as it is where I am, then I hope that you are able to cool off a bit. All right, have a lovely evening. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.